All right, we're here to talk today about bushcraft knife uses. What can you do with a bushcraft knife? So this is a super cub. It tends to be along the lines of a hunting knife slash bushcraft. You can do bushcraft type activities with this super cub. And we talk in our other video that we have about bushcraft knives, how to select a bushcraft knife. You know, you could go to that and see what makes a knife a bushcraft knife. But a super cub meets a lot of those expectations. It's got enough blade length to be able to do some different things that we'll kind of demonstrate and talk about here today. So let's get on to the uses of what you can use a bushcraft for. I would say one of the most important things when you're out in the environment, out in the field, is how to build a fire. To be able to build a fire is absolutely critical. And there's some activities that go along with that are important. So chopping wood, right? Being able to get a piece of wood, chop it down, and make smaller wood for kindling. When you go to build a fire, you need small tinder. So carving moss off of a tree, carving bark off of a tree, shaving a tree, getting little shavings off of a branch to create yourself some real fine particles to be able to try to light. Also being able to baton your knife through wood. And actually, let's talk about what batoning is. That's using your knife, and let's just say we've got a piece of wood here. We set the blade here on that like so, and then we would use another stick, maybe not a wire brush, log or a rock to pound that down through a log. So that's how you baton. You get that blade up on there and you beat that blade down through. Now that bushcraft knife better be able to hold up to that kind of pressure on the edge. It's a lot of abuse on your edge, and it's also a lot of abuse to your spine. Be careful, especially with like a rock, of beating too hard way out on the fine part of the tip. Try to pound in here an inch or 2 inches in from the tip, depending on how big your wood is. So that's batoning for firewood. Let's talk about building a shelter. There again, a very critical survival tool for you to know how to do out in the field, a skill to know how to do. So building a shelter requires, there again, maybe cutting branches off, chopping branches off of a tree, chopping trees down or poles down to be able to use tent poles to be able to put up to build that shelter to then put your branches on. Also just generic cutting activities when you're in the field. So if you do build a shelter, being able to cut like paracord or vines or anything to tie up around that shelter, to tie up that paracord in any other aspect that you're gonna need. You just wanna be able to have general cutting purpose for that knife. And that might sound obvious, but a lot of knives out there that I've seen, these bushcraft knives, are way too heavy, way too thick, and actually just don't cut well. They're just meant to be these big, strong, tough blades, but it's really a pry bar. It's not a knife at that point. Prying. Prying is another thing that actually we should talk about with bushcraft. To be able to pry things that you need is an important necessity. However, you got to be careful with that, especially on this particular knife or some of ours. I make our tips very thin because I generally think you're going to use your tip to cut way more often than you are to pry. So if you're going to use your blade in a prying form, try and get it inserted in past that tip about an inch to inch and a half, to where you're prying more up into the meatier part of the spine. We're coming out with a new survival knife this year. It'll be a lot heavier tip on it, heavier spine, meant for actually even more of that prying type stuff. Another part of putting a shelter up might just be actually your tent and being able to use the back of your knife to pound tent stakes in. To be able to beat tent stakes in with the back of your knife. Quite frankly, the back of your knife should be tough. That's why I like a full tang blade. You actually have steel back there between your handle scales to be able to beat on stuff. Another thing you can use your blade for is just general foraging for food. You can actually use these blades to scrape, use those blades to scrape at the ground and dig up maybe potentially roots or other type of food sources, bugs, that kind of stuff that you see people trying to eat on Alone or Naked and Afraid, television shows like that. So general foraging, cutting berries off, cutting food that different food sources out depending on where you're at in the world. Here in Montana, there's not a hell of a lot of foraging that you can do in our forests, but in other parts, rainforests and other parts of the world, there's actual food sources that are growing. Self-defense is another big one that we got to think about with a bushcraft knife. You're out in the field and you're out there alone a lot of times, and you want to have a blade to be able to defend yourself potentially from predators or even just from other humans. So that's another thing to think about. Learn how to use your knife, watch some videos on self-defense, general just knife practices when you're using your knife in self-defense, and how to take care of yourself and defend yourself potentially from somebody that's got ill intentions. You know, we don't generally talk about wanting to go out and fight a mountain lion or a bear with a knife. However, if you find yourself backpacking and you have food in your backpack, if you're staying overnight, you will have food in your backpack. You are prey. Trust me, you are absolutely prey. So, you know, carrying bear spray or a gun is a great thing, obviously, but if you can get to your knife and use it to defend yourself, you're gonna have a lot better chance against a bear, mountain lion, wolf, something like that. Last couple things that I can think about, first aid, and really honestly we could have put this one first. Having a blade to be able to perform first aid is a very important tool. Even just digging out slivers, you know, digging out something that maybe punctured you, a stinger from a bee, something like that. Being able to cut clothing away, the fact that if you need to get a tourniquet on or pack a wound, clean up a wound, get dirt out of a wound, you want to be able to maybe potentially cut some clothing away if you don't have some trauma shears. So first aid's definitely something that you can use your bushcraft knife for. Fishing, actually, and you don't really think about this, but I've even seen people doing this on Alone, on the television show, is like chopping your way through ice to potentially get yourself a hole chopped for ice fishing. So, you know, obviously once you catch the fish, you have to be able to prepare those fish, dress those fish out, gut them, fillet them, whatever, for you to be able to consume them. So cutting fishing line, doing all that kind of stuff is very important. So those are some uses for bushcraft. I will be fully honest, I am not a bushcraft expert. I don't go out and play around with the bushcraft stuff. Our employee Tristan does. He loves the bushcrafty type stuff. Another good one to follow is Laura Zera. She's always out in the field doing bushcrafty type things. You know, and this Super Cub works great for that. So that's some bushcraft uses for a bushcraft knife. But the biggest and most important thing is to get out in the field and actually practice those techniques and learn how to do it. So when you find yourself in a survival situation, you actually can build a fire. That I definitely have done. I do that with my children. Every time we're out hunting, we almost always build a fire just to make sure that we know we have those skills to be able to do that. So good luck out in the field and stay safe.